Welcome to today's Survivor Circle, and welcome to our presenters, Melanie and Susan. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I may be a familiar face to you on here. I've done a bunch of these circles over the past year, but I'm really honored today to have a guest with me, an honored guest that is a dear friend of mine and colleague. And we've been on quite a journey individually and together. And a little bit about me. My name is Melanie. I'm a subject matter expert with Zero Abuse Project Survivor Space Project. Contributing content for the website, survivor led content, and sharing my own story through different avenues on the website. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse and sexual assault. I'm an advocate kind of by trade. I'm a trained forensic interviewer. I've spent over 10 years working in various roles in the victim services field. And it's been quite a journey. And so when I've done these circles, I really like to bring people on, give a platform for people that have been really monumental on my journey, for people who I've crossed paths with that have made a difference on my journey for good. And Susan absolutely is one of those, and her family and her daughter and her other daughters and her husband. They've all just been such a gift and blessing to me to cross paths with on this difficult journey. One of my favorite quotes is difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. And I'm kind of sitting here at a bit of that beautiful destination. And so I'd love to hear more, Susan. Let us know who you are, and then we'll dive into it today.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. It means so much for me as well to be here with you. And thank you to the Zero Abuse Project and the Office of OVC for funding this, because becoming full circle with you today after this long journey of almost 10 years reminds me of why I do this work. First of all, I'm the mother of 3 daughters, ranging from age from 28 to 18. I have been an at-home mother for the last 28 years. And I just had a child leave the nest. So I now have an empty nest, and I'm very excited about this next chapter. And I'm the co-founder with my daughter Chessy of I Have the Right To, an organization that believes that all students have the right to an education free from sexual assault. So yeah, that's my brief background, and I'm ready to jump in if you say so, Mel.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I knew nothing about sexual assault, really, except I did without understanding that when my daughter was 15 years old and she was a freshman, or as they call it, fourth former at St. Paul's School, and she was targeted in a game um, called the Senior Salute, where younger students were targeted in a game of sexual predation. And when our daughter called me 3 days after the assault to let me know that something terrible had happened, I didn't even have the words to confirm what she said to me or ask. I didn't even know that when she said that she had had sex with someone and she did not want to, I did not even have the words rape in my mind. So all I knew as a mother, my child's well-being was the most important thing to me, and that I would do everything in my power to make sure that she got through this another day, another night, and that she would survive it. So we learned the hard way, unfortunately, and I'm so glad there is this opportunity to share this story with parents out there and families and survivors, so that they can know that there is, as you said, it is a very rough road, but there's a beautiful destination ahead. And I'm so grateful that we're also at that place right now. It's not perfect, and the journey has been very difficult, but Chessy, our daughter, is now 25 years old, and she can now say that, Mom, there has been more good that has happened in my life than bad at this point. And, you know, I'm grateful to God every day. Faith has been a tremendous part of our journey as well. And I personally don't know where I would be without faith and understanding that that God had us in his hands when we were going through this. So I just want to respectfully say that, and also that I do understand everyone's journey is different. Mel, I know we have a lot of commonalities between your experience and Chessy's and our families. Um, and today, especially, I'm here to talk about secondary traumatization and how we certainly didn't know anything about that, and that it's real, and that the sexual assault of our daughter's perpetrator against her has had enormous ramifications against our family that still reverberate to this day, actually 10 years later. The anniversary was this past May. And there's so many things we've learned that I wish I knew at the beginning, and I didn't. So I'm here, to share a little bit of that today too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just reflecting back too. So it's been 20 years for me, May of 2004 as well. So I didn't even realize that commonality of a similar month and things like that. And so this is a monumental year for me as well. I'm sure as it is for you and your family of 10, it being 10 years, a decade. For me, it's been 2 decades. And just like the weight that that carries, but also the lightness that that carries of like, wow, we went through so much, but also, wow, we went through so much and survived it and are thriving and are doing, we're in that beautiful destination. And so it's both of those things. And that's very much like what the healing journey is. It can be both heavy and light. And so I think it's just really powerful just to kind of sit here and reflect with you, alongside you, on what the journey takes, but also what we learn along the way.
I remember giving you those first hugs in New Hampshire, and you actually were witness to some of the opposition that our family faced. I keep a little Post-it note over my desk that says less than 1%, and that is the statistic. And I know you're part of that as well, Mel, that you're part of the less than 1% that reports the crime, that has a criminal justice process follow that, where authorities support, uh, you know, bringing charges against the perpetrator, and then where there's a measure of justice handed out, and some sort of responsibility taken. So, and that's really far from a perfect system. Unfortunately, we felt really blessed with everyone that was part of our journey. And I know you did too, actually. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the heartbreaking reality is that not every survivor has that. And so that's what communities like this are for, that even if survivors didn't have that, we want you to know that like there is a community out there to support you even miles away. Obviously we're all in different geographical locations. And I think that's why I was drawn to connecting with Chessy too, is that although I did have the support within my family and my team, the detective on my case and the team that was put in place to investigate this and bring it to trial, I was longing for that survivor solidarity, because as much as those people were very supportive and my family was very supportive, they didn't live it. And so being able to connect with other survivors was monumental on my journey. And when I saw at first Chessy was protected, her identity was protected, so I didn't know who she was, but I heard her words and her story, and then kind of followed it, and eventually in a beautiful way we got to connect in person multiple times now. And there's just like an unsaid thing about solidarity with survivors, that you don't have to go into the details. The pain, the difficulty, the shame that you carry or carried at one point, and it's just a beautiful thing when you can just do life together outside of that. Chelsea and I have made great memories walking her dog, and being in DC with all of you and enjoying great dinners and just living life after trauma. And I think that's a lot of what, the outcome, the outcome is that you can live a beautiful life after trauma. But we're here talking today about what it took to get there and what we learned along the way.
Right. That's right. And we absolutely lost our community at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. And we were truly traumatized by that as a family. My husband was a graduate. My eldest daughter had graduated the weekend that Chessy was assaulted, and Lucy lost her community as well. And that was devastating. And I have to say, as a parent, we always use the analogy, when you're a parent, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. Well, we didn't. We put it on Chessy right away, and we definitely forgot about the other two, because we were so frightened by what had happened, and the fact that, we didn't want our daughter, frankly, to commit suicide or to drop out of school or to just drop out of the life that we knew she was meant to have. And we didn't want this crime to, I laugh now saying it, affect her more than it had to, but we all know it is life-changing once you're sexually assaulted. I have come to talk about it as soul murder. And that was my intent as a mother, that no matter what, my daughters would know that she was loved and cared for, and that she had a right to the life that she was born to live. So, and I've since tried to make it up to her sisters, and it hugely affected me as well, and my husband. My husband, I'm so grateful. We had lived a life where we traveled quite a bit. We moved quite a bit. So our family unit was really strong, by necessity. We were expats in Asia, and we had moved homes quite a bit. And so it was always our nuclear family that we knew as our best comfort zone. We didn't have to worry about our neighborhood necessarily, about quote unquote the church, the club, anything that that people have in their community when you live in a place in a long time, for a long time. My husband had alumni that were part of this story, and my daughter Lucy had friends, of course, and their parents, and nobody ever thought for a second, wait, we shouldn't make too big a deal of this because we're going to lose all that, and people won't like us speaking up, or they will not believe us or believe her. And all of that happened. But thankfully, those words never came out of our mouth. Like, think about the consequences of speaking up. I think, frankly, I was born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s, and came of age in the 80s. I knew that a woman's voice was really important. And naively, after living overseas all these years, I thought everybody respected women's voices. And here we are in 2024, still fighting for that. But I knew that what happened to Chessy awakened something in me so that the trauma didn't decimate us. We respected the process. We're a lot of rule followers in our family, and we went through the criminal process almost reflexively. The detective said, "Would you like to give a statement?" Chessy said, "Of course." We were leaving town the next day, and she gave a statement, and it turned out that it took a female prosecutor listening to her statement to counter a male prosecutor and say, who said, "I don't like this fact pattern." And the female prosecutor, Catherine Ruffle, what an amazing human being she is and she was there, said, "If we don't start taking these cases, we will never make a dent in this issue." And so that is exactly what propels us in our work today. If we don't share our stories and talk to each other about the deep-seated roots of sexual violence and misogyny and power that is underpinning all our acts of sexual violence, the search for power, we will never make a change in the systems that allow this to flourish quietly, and turn people's lives upside down and off track and decimate people's souls.
I think you and I have talked a lot about, Chessy and I, in similar ways, had all the support in the world, right? We had every bit of support. Our parents believed us. We had somewhat of a supportive community. I know your family went through a lot with your community, but we still had the unit, right? The unit of support that you had. And Chessy had her own supports that stayed in place in other geographical locations. And just, the connections we made over the years that continue to propel us forward. And so even in the best case scenario with this type of crime, Chessy and I still struggled, and we still went through peaks and valleys of the healing journey, even with all of the support. And I think that's one of the most important things today is like to talk about today is that Chessy and I had all the support in the world, but we still struggled, you know, and it still did take things from us, and it still was marked by darkness, right? And so really being able to understand the perspective of survivors that don't have the support, like how are they to carry on? And so we're really here to kind of give voice to that as well, of like, we know that, you know, we had all the support and we still struggled. And so of course other survivors are going to struggle down the road. But what can we do to be catalysts for change with our voices, with that solidarity, with maybe changing perspective of, again, those like fact patterns that you're talking about. Like it's never going to be perfect, especially if it's a trauma, right? And so really just being able to utilize our own voices to give other voices freedom. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that your family has done with your own pain. Is it has now become beyond Chessy's story, right? Like you have, it started because of Chessy's story and her experience and what you were living in real time. But I know I've seen it, you know, both from the outside and now from the inside, you know, working with you guys on kind of more of a professional level, seeing that beautiful transformation of like, now it's beyond our family story, it's for others now. And so I've done a little bit of the same thing as well, still using my story as kind of the cornerstone, but also trying to elevate other voices, which is why I love bringing other people onto this platform to share their stories, to share their journey, because I think, you know, my friend Nicole Bromley, who's a survivor as well, has written a couple books. She always says, and I love it, it's so powerful. She says, we are not all called to a platform, but we're called to use our voice. And so some people, this kind of more intimate setting is the place where they will be able to share their story. Other people, it's at a conference. We were just talking about the Nova conference in DC. Some people, it's at that platform where there's hundreds and hundreds of people. For some people, it's that one-on-one conversation, and you could be that person that someone trusts to have that one-on-one conversation with, and they may never tell anyone else ever again. And so really kind of having our eyes and ears open to survivors, to families, and even, especially even you're talking about like siblings of a survivor, you know, families of a survivor, the collateral damage that it does to those around who may not have that, you know, gift of, okay, we're putting the oxygen mask on the survivor, but what about those around them, you know? And so I love that you brought up kind of all of that, like it's all it's all impactful. And so really being able to, like, other moms lifting other moms up, you know, and you know, you've done a beautiful job of that, I know for a fact. I've heard from some people. And so it's just really paying attention to what's going on
Exactly.
around us with this issue.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that whole array of responses to that survivors can bring forth. I mean, I can think of so many survivors that, for a number of reasons, either the authorities aren't supportive of the person bringing a case, or it's happened after a certain amount of time and it's a very difficult to bring the case forward, or they're fearful of what might happen to a family member that the perpetrator is still in touch with, or that they're still working out their feelings. So I think that even journaling it, putting it down on paper, can be an enormous step forward, and just, you know, articulating what they endured is a huge step
Mm.
forward.
Yeah.
It really can take so many, you know, shapes and forms. Like we know with the Me Too movement that started, and, you know, of course, what happened to you and what happened to Chessy happened before the Me Too movement. And just to hear someone whisper to someone else, "Me too," is, you know, a huge catalyst for love and support, right? So, you know, I think of one young survivor who just graduated high school, and they are intent that they do not want this perpetrator to perpetrate again. And but so much is not within their control. as, a young, adult at 18. And so the best way forward, because this wonderful advocate, Julia Dixon, once told us that you can't go through a mountain and you can't really go around the mountain. The mountain's always going to be there. So when you decide to climb it, is your time. You figure out when it's time to climb it, but it's always going to be there. And I know you can't force someone to do that. So we have to respect where survivors are in their journey and all the elements they have to consider. I remember a mother coming up to me at an event saying, my daughter won't talk about her assault. And I remember thinking, my heart went out to her. And also that you can't force a survivor, or certainly a young adult or a child, to talk about something, but you can keep the lines of communication open and you can keep opportunities for support ongoing. So, what I did, no one took me by the hand and said, okay, so here's how we advocate for change. Because after Chessy got through what she got through, and after all the appeals that happened in the court system, and the perpetrator who kept fighting against the judgment of the court, and after he, still would not take responsibility, my husband and I decided we needed to share the message of what had happened and pay it forward and try to make change in our society. The school wasn't interested in making change, and yet, hundreds and upon hundreds of survivors came forward after Chessy, saying the same thing had happened to them at St. Paul's School. So, we felt really strongly that because Chessy survived this and got through it, it's time to make change. So I would say to mothers and parents who are listening right now, or even teachers who are listening, or crisis response administrators at schools or colleges, that, it is of the utmost importance to respect a survivor's timeline and keep feeding them with love and support and information, and keep checking in on them, because passivity, is not going to make change. And so it's a delicate road to walk, against forcing someone to come forward, and respecting their process. So we've worked with mothers who've joined our organization as volunteers while their child has decided not to come forward. And there's a healing path in that as well. So it's not black and white. The healing journey is not prescriptive. And it's really an individual set of responses. So the young person that I really have so much respect for is going on to college. And she has got so many hopes and dreams. And you trust me, it's been 10 years. The pieces will all fall into place as long as you keep up your vision of trying to root out sexual violence in our communities.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've talked about, like you mentioned here, is like the healing journey is not linear. It's not prescriptive. So things, I even look back on 20 years of a journey, looking at things that were helpful for me back then that I don't need now to heal, And so I've often been asked, because I've had multiple instances of sexual abuse and assault in my life, even beyond the one case that I had that actually went forward. And people have asked me, like, do you need, like, would you need to bring those forward for healing? And for me, the answer has been like, no. Like, I definitely don't regret necessarily how my first process happened. It kind of happened. I was very young. I was 12 years old. So the process kind of started for me. I didn't really choose it necessarily, but I was kind of along for the ride. And it definitely gave me some empowerment. It gave me a stronger voice. It definitely helped me kind of stand and like see that I could stand in the face of adversity. So that's helped me in my life as an adult, right? I've already been through so much, like standing in the face of adversity in a courtroom. So like this other thing I can handle, but I also, with other instances of assault in my life, like I don't feel like at this point I needed to bring those forward, just because, of the circumstances and different things. And so the beautiful thing is that the healing journey is unique. And so, I've been able to heal exponentially through my faith as well. And so I didn't need that courtroom for my healing. And that's what some survivors strongly feel. And so really being able to talk about like the different ways, survivor space has been a huge asset to that, really giving survivors a platform to share their writing, share their poetry, share their tips and of healing, creating videos of spoken word poetry, sharing podcasts that really like impacted their survivor journey, and the website is standing. So, survivors can access those resources like I really want to write my story. Let me listen to a couple survivors, speaking their poetry out or read a couple survivors' poetry on this website. And so Survivor Space has been a great platform to kind of look at other ways of healing, even if the criminal justice aspect. And Natasha just dropped that in the chat, along with the I Have the Right to website. So those are two great resources. And Susan, I think at the end we'll talk more about I Have the Right to. We'll make sure we'll get that in at the end about kind of the work that you're doing and things like that, so people know what they can request or if they have any needs there. But one of the things I wanted to, that you and I talked about that I'd love to hear your perspective on is how everything you started to see everything with like a new lens,
Yes.
that this journey has really shaped everything, down to songs you're listening to, down to everything. And when you and I were talking, I just found it was really beautiful how you explained that. And so and I think it's very relatable for anyone at any point on the journey, in any role on the journey, really.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Mel. And so after Chessy left St. Paul's School, she came back to a new community and a new school, and she was still anonymous. People still did not know she was the person behind these lurid headlines of the St. Paul's School rape case. And and that was really hard. And I respect every survivor's right to anonymity. And of course, Chessy was so young, it was hard for her to, she had the right to anonymity. But as her mother, I also knew my husband and I, who is an amazing advocate for educating boys, knew that this was going to follow her to college. And how was she going to explain that she left this school and under what circumstances? And so it was interesting. St. Paul's School, the level that they would drop to kept getting lower and lower. And finally, they challenged her anonymity in a court filing. So all of a sudden, she was not going to be anonymous anymore if we were to proceed in our civil case against the school to make changes at the school. So that was how Chessy became public eventually. But there was a quiet time when we were at the new school where nobody knew she was the St. Paul's School student. I'm sure some people guessed because she left the school. So there would be like a song like by Aretha Franklin on the radio as I came back from dropping her at school. And I remember the theme was "A rose is still a rose." And later on, I met another survivor, Drew Dixon. She was the producer on that song. And I would just belt that song out in the car, crying when my kids were all back, safely at school and I was alone, because that's what I wanted for my children. I wanted their beauty and their hopes and their dreams still to flourish. And that song kind of embodied that for me. And so Chessy and I would start trading songs actually after that. And she would play new songs for me, when we would drive. And it even, reached down to my 7-year-old at the time. And sadly, our 7-year-old was going through a lot at the time. And we didn't even realize that a 7-year-old sibling could be digesting all the social dynamic changes in a family. We thought we were getting her to school, getting her to her play dates, keeping the meals on the table. And, as soon as Chessy left St. Paul's School, the first thing that she did was march in a Girl Scout parade with me and her little sister. And Chessy looked at me like, I can't believe I'm doing this, Mom. And I'm like, well, you're part of the family at home now. You need to do this. And I remember how I sobbed when I can to go from boarding school and independence to needing me to pack her a lunch again. So there were all these, ups and downs in a daily routine. But yes, so there's a really cool story about how this author came to her school, and her name was Sue Monk Kidd, and she wrote this beautiful book called The Secret Life of Bees. And you might see behind me, there's some books. I am an avid reader. Reading has transported me throughout my life, to have a wider view of the world. And I was reading this second book of hers called The Invention of Wings. And Chessy was back at school, still anonymous. And I asked her English teacher if I could come to the lecture by the author, Sue Monk Kidd. And, I'm usually not that parent horning in at school things, but I did. And I raised my hand because she talked about writing memoirs. And The Invention of Wings is a historical fiction about these two sisters called the Grimke sisters. And they were both denied an education in, I believe it was South Carolina at the time. And the father forbid them to use his library. Well, one of the sisters ended up starting or becoming part of the Quaker movement in schools. And it was all about them fighting for their rights. Well, I read this book, and don't you know, I marched up to St. Paul's with the book. I gave it to every administrator. I said, this is what's going on with my kids. And so, of course, they didn't listen. But I raised my hand to the author in that room with all these high school students, and Chessy's right there. And I said, when is it a good time for someone to write their stories of what they've learned in the world? Like, when in the process did you start writing your stories that are so immortalized in these beautiful books? And she looked me right in the eyes and she said to me, when they're ready. And I was like, touche. And then I don't even know if she knew Chessy and I were together. But when Chessy went up to get a copy of the book signed, she wrote, oh, and I'm going to get it wrong. She wrote something like, I have a feeling about your voice, and I think you're going to use your voice in amazing ways. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to leave Chessy to her own, rhythm and time, and she'll tell me when she's ready to speak up about what's happened to her. And sure enough, she did. And she wrote that her amazing memoir that we still get people writing to us every week about how it has changed their lives. And, that is another step on a journey of solidarity. I see in the chat, the wonderful Leasia has written about how solidarity with survivors is a great comfort. And, of course it is. And it took us 2 years to find another survivor, really. And that was devastating. So I would suggest, reaching out to resources for anyone listening to this. Mothers, reach out to other mothers, fathers, same, write to us. We're always happy to connect people, to talk to one another. And even siblings. I would love to see siblings connected with other siblings. My youngest daughter, who is 7, is now 18. She just started college, freshman year of university, and she writes a funny little snarky note to me that she just has had to undergo sexual assault training at school in an auditorium through a play. And she wrote a kind of funny comment back, and like, to the extent that I can't get away from this, something like that. And, I mean, we have to have humor with it in our family with her, because she will say, my life has been completely changed by this. We talk about this all the time. And even when my friends come over, and she's right, we do talk about it. We work from home and we talk about the issues surrounding sexual violence and what our hopes are for the future and how we can educate students. She'll make a joke that it's past the salt, and did you see the latest case happening in the news today? And we've tried to be respectful. She has taught us. And that's the other thing, Mel. I know you're a new mother, so it might be hard to envision this, but I would second Chessy's comment. We have now learned more from our daughters, all three of them in this process, than we probably have taught them about it. And that has been what the most exciting part of this journey. It has brought us closer together, all of us, and has brought the sisters closer together too. There was a moment when I wasn't sure our family would remain intact, and that the sisters could have not have had as strong of bonds, but we made certain decisions along the way where we said, those are the most important things to us, that they have the love and support of one another, and we don't do things that break that bond by any means. So that was hugely important to us.
Yeah. I think on my journey, it's a little different because I'm an only child. And so I didn't have a sister to kind of go through it with, or a sister to be impacted by it. But also, even just looking at my daughter now, my daughter's 14 months, and looking at the ways that she's essentially healed me. A lot of my life has been focused on this, right? So I was 12 years old when it happened, 9 years old when it first happened, 12 years old when kind of the more monumental experience happened. And so, I spent much of my life over the past 20 years, healing from this, advocating, pursuing my career, working in it, doing it day in and day out. And so over the last couple of years, I got married, I had a baby. And so really looking at, for the first time, around when I started dating my now husband, I started to really look at like, who am I outside of this? And, him and my daughter have continued to show me that like they're not focused on this, and so really being able to see that, and see how that's actually given me freedom in areas I didn't know I needed freedom, and healing in areas I didn't know I needed healing. Really being able to introduce myself, even at professional conferences, as a survivor more than my story. And look at what does life look like after trauma. I feel like so much of my adolescence and even my college years were focused on this, whether it be healing from it or advocating for it, advocating for others. And so what does it look like to not like be tuned in to some of the cases, right? And not be watching certain things, and not be, I mean, there are times when I'm in the trenches, if I'm doing some work or connecting to someone or connecting to something, but more often than not right now, I'm really diving into just living life after trauma. And what does that look like? Silly moments with my daughter, seeing life through her eyes. It's very simple, it's not clouded by all of this. And even my husband, he did not come from an experience of really even knowing anyone personally. I mean, he works with youth, so he's heard things, but it's never been anyone super close to him. And so when we started dating, I had to tell him all of these things, that had happened and what work I was doing. And it was just like probably a lot for him at first. But he brings that out in me too, of like, doing things outside of this. And that can be so healing to just like put it down. And I know you and your family are really good at that as well. Of like, we're signing off for the weekend, like, and we're going to our safe spaces. And I'm really encouraging, your youngest to just be herself outside of this. And so I think that's been, although it's different perspective, I think it ties into the same idea of like life after trauma. What does that look like? How do we get there? What things do we remove? Like I could never picture, it's interesting because it's so like years ago, I was so entrenched in like, especially when I was still struggling, going through the darkest times, of like, I could never picture never watching Law and Order SVU again. And honestly, I haven't watched it in years, and that's such a silly example because that is so far from like
No, not at
reality of
all.
how things go. But at the
Right.
same time, like I idolized Mariska Hargitay because I like always wanted to like be her. And now that I've actually lived like being an advocate in the trenches, walking alongside survivors, being in courtrooms, doing the work, I'm like, I don't need to come home and watch that. I've done it, And so really that shift of narrative on what the healing journey, and early on, that was really helpful for me to not feel alone, even on the darkest days while watching that show or watching other things or being connected to other things, you know, going on websites all the time about this, getting resources and healing and connecting with people. But now what's the most healing for me is like tapping out of it and walking on the beach with my daughter, or um, sitting out at her water table, giggling and blowing bubbles with her, or, you know, doing something my husband likes to do that's out of my comfort zone, you know? So it's like, it's those things that I never pictured I'd even have. And so now it's like, it's a shifted narrative of like, I can step back into the trenches, but it doesn't have to be everything I'm living and breathing all the time. And so there's peaks and valleys of that journey. At times I need to be in it, other times I need to shut it off. And so that's the beauty of that both and on the healing journey. And that's really what I've been able to embody in this recent season of like stepping out of it, unless I'm have to for, you know, for a reason, one reason or another.
Right. So a couple of things that I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I know one of the first things Chessy did was get a dog, and she has devoted her life to her beautiful mini golden doodle, and she gets so much joy, and it's such a huge responsibility. I mean, you know, how it is to take care of a little one. Well, it's very similar in that she has to be on deck for this little life, like as she calls it. And so I've watched her get enormous joy from taking care of her beautiful JJ. Um, and also, you know, seeing each of my children flourish. I mean, we've gone through some really difficult times. The assault and the aftermath continued to affect our eldest daughter when she went to college. She had to always navigate the line of who's on our side as far as supporting Chessy, or who's on the institution side and the perpetrator's side. So her community shrunk quite a bit, but we've all been able to build a community that is far richer than the ones that we lost. I will unequivocally say that. And that if anyone's in the process right now, finding that their people are falling off from their lives, well, just remember, you will find your community again if you search for them. And so this brings me to the joyful part of the story, the positive work we're doing right now to create change in the world. Chessy has become a filmmaker. She was always going to be a filmmaker. As a little girl, she'd say, Mom, do you want to hear my idea for a movie? And I always knew she saw this big, beautiful world. The one thing we did not teach our children when they were little, and I regret this, is that not everybody wants the best for you in this world. And that is something that's a really hard message for any parent, I think, to tell a child, when you want them to be hopeful and see the world as a beautiful thing. When you look at your own little beautiful daughter, but there is a place to tell children that, and to tell young people that they have to protect themselves. And if you see our logo, that's, you have the right to protect yourself, your heart, your being, and you also have the right to give of yourself when you are ready, and when you consent to. So all of those things fire us up now. So Chessy made a short film called Aftermath, which actually fictionalizes part of her story. And I know she's very proud of it. And it was done with an amazing supportive community in Maine, where we have some wonderful, a newer community for our family. And we're so grateful to all of them. And our eldest is working in criminology and restorative justice. And she continues to teach us every day what it means to think about how we can actually shift the paradigm from hurt people continuing to hurt people in the world. We know Chessy's perpetrator had issues, and when I talked to the school about it, they said it doesn't matter. It's not our problem. And I remember feeling as a parent that was a travesty that they would not discuss it with us, because that's what every survivor wants. They want their perp to get help, to acknowledge what they did, and to never do it again. And of course, you know, the criminal justice system doesn't facilitate that. So we now have come to the point where not only are we going out into schools sharing Chessy's story, sharing our story, sharing other parents and family stories and other survivor stories. But we're actually challenging students to think differently. And had teachers and administrators at St. Paul's ever had the courage to say, not on my campus ever again. We will never have something like the senior salute. We challenge all stakeholders and communities, teachers, administrators, heads of parents associations, parents, caregivers, to say, when you go to middle school and high school, you will live by the rules of consent and you will understand them, and we will make sure you learn what consent is from a legal standpoint and from an ethical standpoint. And that did not happen for my children. And I didn't educate them about it either. And I wish I had. I wish I knew more. But there's so much information out there. And please check out our website. And parents, please reach out to me at susan@IHaveTheRightTo.org and survivors, because we can steer you in the right direction. There's so many important books that kind of led me along the way to where we are now. And one of those is teaching our young men to resist societal pressures. My husband does amazing workshops with his mentors and other facilitators about what is a real man in 2024. What are we teaching our boys, and what are the effects, the difficult effects of social media on them? Are we truly talking about this in our safe spaces at home? And are we finding ways to get our young men to, to turn away from porn and to turn away from what society says real men do? And had they done that 10 years ago, we would not be sitting here. Had teachers 10 years ago heard stories of the perp doing harmful things to girls beforehand, we would not be sitting here. So it takes everyone to say, hang on, wait a minute. As Bell Hooks says, our children have rights that are not being respected. Our students, they may not be adults in our society, but they have rights as human beings that we all need to support. And that's where we get the name of our simple, organization, I Have the Right To. And we're teaching young people what their responsibilities are now, too, when they have these rights. So, we believe safety starts with respect. Every student is deserving of respect. And it's up to all of us stakeholders in our children's futures to make sure that they are afforded that.
Yeah. I think it reminded me of this quote I heard years ago, just brought to my mind now, as it does when you listen to people share powerful things. The children almost broken by the world become the adults most likely to change it.
Yes.
And I love that. I think obviously we're talking about adults' roles as well, but also with what I Have the Right To does with empowering youth and kids, really at any age, to be the voice not only for themselves, but even for their peers. And what does that look like to create that environment at their own school? And I think that's the incredible kind of niche work that I Have the Right To is doing, which is unique. It's not easy to get into schools because often schools are afraid to kind of touch these subjects. But the way that I Have the Right To is and does is such a beautiful way to make this happen, to make this change happen, to start with the youth speaking up, finding their voices, even on other things, but in the classroom, even being able to share about just their thoughts on these things, even if it hasn't happened to them, and I think that's really, really empowering. And using, we talked about kind of the closing of this would be really talking about pain as a catalyst for change and joy. And the key word being joy. There is joy in solidarity, being believed, feeling supported, even if, you know, the person supporting you hasn't been through it, if they just say like, I support you, you know, I don't know what it looks like or what we're going to do from here, but I'm going to walk with you. And I think that's just a beautiful thing that we can continue to create, starting with youth, but going all the way up through adulthood. And I think it is courageous for people to own like, hey, the first time you told me I didn't handle it well, I did not say the right thing. And I know that you've talked about that in your role as a mom going through it. I definitely, you know, had received some of those things of like people who maybe didn't do it right the first time, but they were willing to kind of come back alongside me and say, hey, like I get it now. You know, I get what you were talking about. You know, I get where what I maybe should have said, or maybe I shouldn't have said anything and just listened to you. And I think that's one of the biggest things for survivors is we don't want people to fix it. We don't want people to have all the answers. We don't want you to hold yourself to a standard that you can't, you know, follow through with. Um, but we just want to be heard, believed, and supported, and that's and loved, really loved through it. And that's what you and your family have exemplified so beautifully, not only for yourselves within your own unit, but for others on their own journeys. You know, you coming alongside other moms and allowing them to even work with your organization as a way to give back or to heal or to feel empowered themselves if they couldn't, you know, do what they wanted to for their child. You're giving them an arena to give back, to create change and empowerment for other young people. And so it's a ripple effect and it's a really beautiful one. So yeah, I know we've got about 5 minutes left, but I'd love to hear any last minute thoughts or anything else that you wanted to bring to the forefront before we close
I
or
wish,
before we ask for questions.
sure. I wish in the beginning I had employed just that strategy that you're talking about. I wish I had said to Chessy, I wish I'd said to my 7-year-old or my 18-year-old at the time, do you need to be hugged? Do you need to be heard? Or do you need to be helped right now? And if I had approached every crisis that way, I think it would have been less devastating for all of us and maybe just taken the temperature down a little bit too. But as parents, we want to fix things for our children. And unfortunately, it's not in our power to fix everything. And we we've taken the long road as a family. And I'm proud to say that we have each learned so much. And we haven't been perfect, but it is our journey and we're still on it. And we are filled with joy about how the future can come and make the world truly a more supportive place for all survivors of sexual violence.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, you know, just to kind of go back to the full circle, like, you know, 10 years ago, you know, our initial connection, like who would have thought we would be sitting here, right? And I have the complete honor of working with I Have the Right to now and just being able to be a facilitator for some of those conversations starting this school year, really. And just like looking back on the journey, you know, both individually for me, but also, you know, looking back when I first connected with Chessy, I was kind of in the back end of my like justice journey, I guess, and she was just starting hers. And, you know, you and I hadn't even connected yet. And it's just a beautiful thing to look back and you know, you and I have had some really powerful conversations about all of these things. And really being able to kind of bear witness, even though obviously as a mom, your journey was different than my journey as the survivor. But there are things that we can agree on, there are things that we can learn from each other. There are things that we can, you know, even just the support, like, you know, if you were dropping your daughter off at school this past weekend, you know, your last one leaving your home, and I, you know, was able to say like thinking of you, you know, during that empty
Mhm.
nest thing, and like you've supported me on different parts of my journey, and even having my daughter, I remember you sending me a message when I was going in to have her, and just like supporting each other in the life things beyond the story, right? Like none of those things really had to do with how we first met or Chessy's story or my story, but it's just being able to say like we have this underlying solidarity with what we faced in life. But then it really carries beautifully into love and support in other aspects, celebrating victories together, celebrating life. I love how you're able to get your team together at different conferences and host things at your home for different organizations. I've stayed at your home when I've been at conferences. And so it's just a beautiful thing born out of pain. Obviously, all of this was born out of deep-seated pain and impossible violation of both Chessy and I. But it really, like Chessy said, she said it so beautifully, that there's more good things in our lives now from this, directly correlated to this, really, than the bad things. And that's really the power that we hope for all survivors to gain, is that, you know, your community becomes more as a result of this, your healing becomes more as a result of this, your creativity becomes more, your professionalism becomes more, your growth becomes more, in spite of what happened to you. And so I think we could probably close with that, unless you have any final thoughts.
So beautifully put, Mel. And yeah, I think you just summed it up perfectly. And again, full circle. And I love drawing these full circles throughout the journey too. And we just, as we dropped Christiana off, we went to a place up in New York called Watkins Glen, and we went to see a marker for somebody who had crashed his car up there, and his name was Sam Collier. And Sam crashed his car in 1950, but the year before that, his son had committed suicide at St. Paul's School. He was only 12 years old, and he'd been abused by another older student and by a chaplain at the school. And he was basically erased from his family's history books. His family, however, his present generation family, were our friends in Naples, and they didn't even know the story, but it was the first recorded story at St. Paul's of someone who had had abuse against them. And when we heard that story, we felt like it was a tap on our shoulder. So taking our daughter, leaving our, letting her out of the nest, and then going up there and kind of just paying homage to this person whose lives had been affected by sexual violence was a real full circle moment for us as well. And we look for those throughout because they're there. And it just inspires us and continues us to kind of want to make change in the world.
Yeah, I always say little mercies are everywhere. And
That's
so
right.
even if it's not a big thing that's, it's not right in front of your face, there's little things that can tie you back to why you started to find your voice, or how you first found your voice, or, the small moments of people just listening or supporting, or, look for those. And I think we often get wrapped up in the hustle and bustle of the healing journey, but also life. And
Right.
I think a lesson to all of us, in that reflection of, if you never paid attention to that and never decided to actually make the active step of going up there, you wouldn't have had that time to reflect.
Well,
So I think for
actually,
all of us, it's important to take this moment and say, okay, where can I look for those little mercies? Where can I look for those full circle moments to remind me of my why, of
yes.
why I keep going, or why I did this in the first place.
Actually, I
Melanie
forgot.
and Susan, I just wanted to say we
Yeah.
only have a minute left, so.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead. Oh,
Susan, did you?
I forgot. We've been on a hike and the bus driver taking us back. Yes. I was just saying that we stumbled upon that marker accidentally. And that was another big moment, that it was our why.
yeah.
But sorry, Natasha.
Go ahead. We'll end it there. And yeah.
Thank you again to all attendees for joining us today. And thank you, Melanie Barton and Susan Prout, for being our presenters today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. And definitely check out the websites and reach out to us if you ever need anything.